You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
All right, everyone. I got Scott Horton returning to the show today. He's been on a bunch of times before, and I'm sure everybody knows who Scott is. But just in case there's one or two people out there who don't, editorial director of antiwar.com. He runs the Libertarian Institute, author of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Pretty much the best case for exactly what the title says, why the Afghan war is a fool's errand and it's time to end it and come home. We'll be talking a little bit about that on today's show, and then some things that he's been, interviewing people on his show, Yemen and Ahmed Hayat being released from jail. So, Scott, welcome back to the show. Great to have you back on.
Thank you very much for having me, Kyle.
All right, so I want to talk about Yemen first, and there's a lot that's been going on there, and I think probably the best source of information anybody could have on Yemen is the series of interviews that Scott has done with Yemeni journalist Nasser Arabi. So, Scott, maybe start off by just saying a little bit about who Nasser is and maybe the series of interviews that you've done with him, and then we'll get into specifically some of the updates in Yemen with the southern separatists in South Yemen.
Sure. So Nasser is a reporter from Sana'a, I guess you're supposed to say, or whatever. I'm a Texan. Pronounce things my own dialect. Anyway, he used to report for the New York Times back in the days of the early Obama years and the CIA JSOC drone war against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula there. And I'm not exactly sure when that relationship broke off. Sort of seems like he became persona non grata when America switched sides for Al-Qaeda in the war against their Houthi enemies. And so he hasn't written for them in a while. However, last year when the New York Times finally decided to send some reporters to report on the famine and all the babies dying of starvation and stuff over there, they did use him to arrange their travel and that kind of thing. So they are still in touch at least. And he did help them to get that story, which is devastating. I mean, if you have the stomach to open your eyeballs up and bear witness to what America has done to those children, there it is, even in the New York Times, magazine and what have you, they have their photo essay about it. And, yeah, it's really something. Anyway, so I don't know exactly his politics. He really seems, in a journalist sense, to not have too many politics. He's sort of not supposed to. Whenever I talk to him, he never really sides with any faction. He only describes them. The only faction he seems to side with in any sense is just the civilian population at large. But when he discusses the Houthis, or when he discusses the Al-Islam movement, which is the Muslim Brotherhood there, or when he discusses the Southern secessionists, who are more socialist types, centered around Aden, or when he discusses, the so-called legitimate government of Yemen backed by Saudi, especially in UAE as well. They are all referred to in an external fashion, right? He never identifies with any of them. He always talks about they think this and they do that. So, I found him to be a really great reporter, really great, on the facts, on bringing us, the day to day about what's happening and getting all of that right without, fear or favor or pulling punches or any of that stuff. But also he's a really great analyst and teacher explaining who's who and who's on whose side and why and all that kind of stuff. And, so that's the nuts and bolts of that. I guess I would add too that second place for best information about Yemen that you could find after my interviews with Nasser Arabi, probably even in first place, would be Jason Ditz at news.antiwar.com. And if anyone goes to news.antiwar.com or just read any article at news.antiwar.com and then look in the right-hand margin there for the word cloud of most important tags there and click on Yemen and you will see he has been absolutely killing it since 2011 or 9 or something, and has just absolutely everything of importance there for you.
Right. So I guess to speed up to what's going on now in Yemen is, we're 4.5 or so years into this ruthless war. You really shouldn't even call it a civil war anymore because it's outside forces that are waging this air campaign and blockade of Yemen. But the Saudi kind of coalition that they have on the ground isn't quite cohesive, and there's different elements of it, including the Muslim Brotherhood affiliate type party in Yemen, the Al-Islah party, and then there's a group of southern separatists who may or may not be kind of wanting to go back to the communist days of southern Yemen being its own state in the Soviet orbit. So I know you interviewed Nasser about this, Scott. Do you want to just kind of go through and break down what's going on there?
Sure. Well, and for anybody who's really new at this, you might find yourself lost pretty quick. I mean, it's hard to really do the full rundown of starting with the wartime, but essentially the Houthis are the Shiite power that came down out of the north and took over the capital city in 2014 and 15. The Saudis intervened with an air war and a, mercenary army war. They essentially have sided with the Al-Islah party, the Muslim Brotherhood, and also made an alliance with the UAE and Sudan and a few other states. Sudan essentially just provided mercenaries, including child soldiers, to go and fight in the UAE's army. And the UAE has the biggest land force there, but they hate the Al-Islah movement and the Muslim Brotherhood. So instead, they back Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who you would think would be considered even worse. But apparently, from their point of view, and this does make sense, right? This is why the Saudis don't have much of a problem backing, opposing, supporting a dictatorship. I don't know how secular it is, pretty much a secular dictatorship in Egypt, or backing suicide bombers in Syria. It's anything to discredit democracy, anything to discredit the idea. They'd take a Zawahiri over a Muslim Brotherhood type who would run for office in the Western fashion. And so that's what scares the monarchs of the Gulf more than anything most of the time, is that, like, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood serves in the parliament in Qatar, and they, ran for office and won in Egypt before they were overthrown in a Saudi-backed, military deep state coup against them back in 2013. But anyway, and then you have now, so the capital city, Sana'a, I guess, is right there in the center of the country, pretty much, from north to south. Virtually the entire east is just desert out there. So when we talk about, a lot of times when people say South Yemen, they're referring to the east too. But most of what's going on is in a kind of north-south faction basis there. And then so the city of Aden, the port city of Aden, where the coal was bombed in the year 2000, that has been mostly under the control of the Southern Transitional Council, who are the Southern Socialists you referred to there, who have their alliance, or have had their alliance with the UAE. And while the UAE at the same time has been backing their enemies and using their enemies in Al-Qaeda as fighters. The socialists and the Al-Qaeda guys are definitely at each other's throat, but they have allies with the UAE in common. And then so Saudi and UAE are split over whether to back Al-Qaeda or whether to back the Muslim Brotherhood, but they're still allies together against the Houthis, who have control over the capital city. And then the 4.5 years of war that you referred to there are the war to remove those Houthis from power, is the war to remove the Houthis from power, which hasn't worked the whole time and is not going to work. They've made no progress toward that whatsoever. And so now a few weeks ago, the UAE announced that they're pulling out of the war. And that really meant they're pulling their troops out, but they're, maybe doubling down on support for private militias and things there. But they're more or less, to a great degree, withdrawing their force from the country, because I think that they were worried that if there was really a war with Iran, that they would be in the middle of it. And, they decided that they would rather not. They have way too much to lose there. You imagine Abu Dhabi getting bombed or, missile attacked, drone attacked by the Iranians in a war, and all of their oil resources and all of that wealth. So they decided, yeah, you know what? Things are getting heated up here in the Gulf right now, and we think we want to go ahead and start making nice with the Iranians again, or nicer. And so they're backing out of that. And then the Houthis have been getting stronger in terms of their technological prowess. Now, of course, Iran always gets the blame or the credit, depending on how you look at it, for in the region, whose side is on whose side. It's really both, right? For all of the Houthis' victories. So anytime the Houthis, send a drone and hit a target in Saudi Arabia, an oil target or something at the airport or whatever, these kinds of things, Iran gets the blame. Iran's support for the Houthis, to whatever degree, is the excuse for the war in the first place. In fact, Netanyahu is threatening to start attacking the Houthis and joining the side of the war with Al-Qaeda and Saudi against the Houthi regime there, in the name of the Iranian threat. And yet, when I talk with Nasser Arabi about this, he just laughs and says, how are the Iranians supposed to be getting all these missiles and all these weapons here? The country's under a blockade. The airport is closed. The seaport is, all the seaports are closed, are under, full lockdown. The country's under a naval blockade. Every bit of anything that gets in the Hudaydah port or the Aden port is inspected and cleared by UN and whatever, ad hoc, American-backed, Saudi-backed officials there. So, how are they sending advanced new drones to the Houthis by email attachment or something? And meanwhile, it's just supposed to go without saying, sort of like the Shia setting off bombs in Iraq War II, that, these bombs just must be coming from Iran. Because why? I don't know. Because an Arab just can't build a drone, only a Persian can? I mean, what are we talking about? What is the unsaid underlying premise here? They never say, and I'm not really sure. But essentially, it's that for whatever reason, it couldn't possibly be the Houthis and their army, expanding upon expertise and weapons bought from the Americans previously that are behind this. But, famously, Nikki Haley presented a reconstructed, missile of some kind of rocket, pretty large two-stage rocket, I guess, or maybe just a one-stage medium-range rocket, but pretty damn big. And it was the wreckage left over from an attack on, I think, the Riyadh airport. And then Scott Ritter, the weapons expert, she claimed that this missile must have come from Iran. Iran sold this missile to the Houthis, and the Houthis then used it against our allies, the Saudis. And Scott Ritter said nope. And then he deployed explicit expertise in very precise and detailed ways, explaining how the reality is that Iran and Yemen both bought these missiles from North Korea years ago. And then if you look here, here, and here, you can see the modifications they made, and here, here, and here, and all of this scientific, detailed, expert stuff to demonstrate that he knew that that was true. He wasn't speculating or confabulating or whatever the way she was. He was saying, no, this is how we know that's not true. And anyway, there's a million of them. Gareth Porter debunked all the different claims of Iran sending weapons to Yemen, to the Houthis in Yemen. If I remember right, it was one of the boats was on its way from Yemen to sell weapons to Somalia. They got so many guns. Yemen is just lousy with guns. Even during wartime, they're exporting them. And then the other one, I think, may have been a ship from Iran, but there was no weapons on it, or it was one of these other things. You'll have to if you just Google Gareth Porter, Iran, Houthis, Navy, you'll find it where he debunks all this stuff. 2 or 3 different articles like that. And then, so the part where I'm fuzzy, Kyle, that I hope I'm right in the way I describe this, is that the recent event is then there's finally been a split between the Southern Secessionist Socialist Council and the UAE. And they had a big fight, and the socialists seized all the buildings from the so-called legitimate government of Yemen that was being backed by the UAE and the Saudis. And, no, that's wrong, because it was the UAE that was still backing them, and the Saudis started bombing them.
Right,
so
that was my take on it.
Even I lost track of this thing at some point.
Because I think their demands right now are that the Saudi government completely get rid of the al-Islam members that hold positions and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know enough about the government to know if that's even possible or whatever. But so I would guess that I don't know if the UAE is still backing the Southern separatists, or maybe the UAE stopped giving them money, so then they, went and did all of this because they could. Did Nasser have any insight as to why maybe they chose now for the attack? Or, but yeah, big development seems to be that Saudi's now bombing these guys, and their second capital now they've lost in Yemen. Yeah,
and then as Moon of Alabama was pointing out too, that the other major development is that the Houthis have been able to strike much deeper into Saudi Arabia now with their latest drone, and so I think he was overstating. That, that's it for the war now. Like, just because the Saudis are licked doesn't mean they're going to quit. They can still afford to fight for no good reason. They haven't gained a thing in 4.5 years. So, it's true now, though, that they must realize that more of what they have is at risk. But I don't know if that's going to convince them to back down. I mean, this guy, you got to think of the public choice theory type individual interests of the warmongers in Saudi, and particularly Mohammed bin Salman. He's supposed to be the king of Saudi for the rest of his life after his old father dies, after starting out life in Saudi politics as the loser who picked a fight with Yemen and lost and couldn't figure out a way to solve it at all. From his point of view, the best thing is probably to continue to just kill these people and hope that it'll sort itself out later somehow. In a way that's beneficial. Just don't quit, and it's clear the Americans are going to go along with that, certainly as long as Trump is in power.
Right. Well, this is a question I want to ask you is, it seems in some sense that the Houthi would be, winning this war at this point. Certainly the Saudi side isn't, but is that doing anything to improve the conditions for, the people living in Yemen? Or, did Nasser have anything to say about, is the blockade being lifted, or are restrictions eased at all? Or is it just still complete even humanitarian blockade? Pretty much the only way people are getting anything is through whatever aid the World Food Program brings in.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I don't know the exact extent of international trade into the port of Aden. I think there's some. But in the Hodeidah port, I didn't get a chance to ask him in the last interview about whether it's open. I know that the UAE withdrew. They failed to take the city or the town of Hodeidah from the Houthis. And then at some point they had a deal where the Houthis withdrew, but then the UAE up and quit anyway. And I think the Houthis came and took control of the town and the port again, which means I'm just guessing. But I think that would mean that there's nothing but UN aid getting in, if anything, and that international trade to the Hodeidah port must still be shut down in that case. Because in the past, that's been the problem, supposedly, is that the Houthis control the port. So I don't think that that's been resolved. And I don't think that, they're saying again this year that the cholera is a real crisis. It seemed to have been a little bit less bad last year. In 2018, but it killed, a couple 100,000 at least in 2017. And they're saying it's on a huge comeback this year. Of course, the Saudis, with America's help, has bombed the cholera hospitals, as well as the waterworks and the electricity and everything to make this all possible. So, no, in the areas that the Houthis control, they're essentially isolated from international trade. And then they have Saudi American / Saudi F-15 fighter bombers destroying infrastructure at every opportunity. As we talked about years ago, 2 or 3 years ago now, they up and moved the central bank from Sana'a down to Aden. And then that meant that all civil servants in the north of the country were essentially laid off overnight. And so no one was getting paid to take out the garbage. And then meanwhile, of course, again, you had the waterworks were being bombed. The sewage was being bombed, just like Colin Powell in Iraq War I. They were deliberately targeting the civilian infrastructure. And so this is what led to the cholera epidemic in the first place there. It's a horror show, man. You know, the thing is, you almost would get the feeling like it must be better now since nobody cares and nobody talks about it except for occasionally sort of kind of you hear a little something. But there's no reason to think that people are in anything but more and more desperate straits there. I mean, from the very beginning of this war, this is the poorest country in the Middle East. They, at that time, were importing somewhere between 80 and 90% of all of their food because the American-backed IMF and World Bank had convinced these people, globalize your economy, sell coffee, sell cocoa, sell, cash crops, and then spend those crops on good old-fashioned American strawberries. It'll be great, whatever it is. Join the global food market. You don't need to just grow subsistence crops anymore. Welcome to the world of global capitalism, which I guess is great. I mean, if it's all based on IMF loans and whoever, then that means that some oligarch is gangsterizing all the land in the first place, of course. But just all other things being equal, that might be fine until we put a blockade on you. Now you got fields full of cocoa and coffee, and you can't feed your people, and you're under blockade. You're cut off from that same global economy. And they hardly have any oil resources there. I think there are some. Again, they have no access to global markets anywhere. It's a genocide, Kyle. I mean, what do you call it when you deliberately inflict a famine on a nation? I mean, the American people are treating these Yemenis like they're just fire ants, and you can just stomp them and you can just squash them, and there is no comeuppance. No comeuppance. We can do whatever the hell we want to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And even if they were, I guess, still growing whatever, kind of food crops, Saudi Arabia has targeted the infrastructure, the farm equipment, and I think, as Martha Mooney even says, flocks of sheep.
Right. All the irrigation, all the grain silos, tractors and whatever equipment, as you say, the storage sheds, the barns, the very basic structure of their food, growth and distribution system in that country has been targeted from the very bottom up, quite deliberately. And you know what? This whole thing about, it's the Saudis doing it, not us, is just deniability and BS. Leading from behind is still leading. For example, does anyone think there would have been a war in Libya if Barack Obama had not ordered the U.S. Navy and Air Force to launch that war, the CIA to run it, that the French and the British were going to do that without us? USA bears responsibility for that more than France and Britain. Same thing here. Why did they even come to Barack Obama and ask permission? Because they needed it. Because they needed America's help. They needed Obama's promise to help them, not just to allow them to do it, to help them do it. We're going to need American spies. We're going to need American contractors. We're going to need American pilots and experts. We're going to need American Boeing mid-air refueling tankers. We're going to need the U.S. Navy to float in those seas, in the Gulf of Aden and in the Red Sea, and to keep any trade out. We're going to need this whole war to be run out of Washington, D.C. Will you help us, please? And Barack Obama said yes. So that might be leading from behind, but that's still leading. America is the world empire, not Saudi Arabia. They're the client state. They're the satellite. And this whole thing could be over right now. Donald Trump, they all look alike to me, these guys. Donald Trump could simply announce, that's it. End the war right now. Turn it off. He doesn't even need to write it down. All he has to do is tell his chief of staff to tell everybody else that he said, we're not doing this anymore. It's over. That's all it would take. A breath. And instead, what does he say? Oh, but we're getting paid all this money. Money? That's what the war is about? Really now? Just money. Got to placate the Saudis. That's what the Obama guys said. Why? Money. What's worse about Donald Trump's genocide in Yemen than Barack Obama's? He's honest. We need that money. And then, of course, you actually look at it and you go, wait a minute. A couple of $10 billion worth of weapons is nothing to the American economy. That's nothing. It's everything in terms of Lockheed support for your political party. But that kind of cronyism and rent seeking doesn't have a damn thing to do with the overall GDP or the American people's national interest. And of course, as proven by Ben Freeman recently and others previously, that of course, just like in logic, spending $1 trillion a year on war, on weapons of destruction and actual carrying out of that destruction is a net negative to everyone, including the American people. All those factory jobs could be producing wealth, not weapons of destruction. All of it is a net loss. And yet Donald Trump, the president of the United States, among a million other outrages, it gets washed away. It's hardly even noticed that he just says, that's right, the USA, we are mercenaries for hire. We kill people for money. And that's just it. That's how we do business. And nobody, he's so busy outraging everybody about everything, no one even notices. In fact, they hear that and they go, well, yeah, at least, he's got that right.
Right. Well,
it is what we're here for, starting wars.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to take the next question anyways. With recently a U.S. drone was shot down over Sana'a, and then the Trump administration said, oh, this is Iranian technology, and that's about what every news story I read about it was on. But I don't understand why nobody is asking what authorization does Trump have to have, I think it was a Reaper drone flying over Sana'a. I mean, are the Houthis, and I don't understand how they could be wrapped up in the 2001 AUMF, if you could explain that one to me.
Well, they're not. And the Obama government and the Trump government, neither of them have invoked the AUMF to support the war against the Houthis, because, of course, you're absolutely right. This has nothing to do with the war against al-Qaeda. This is the war for al-Qaeda against their worst Yemeni allies. And in fact, as we've talked about before, but it's worth repeating, you can find from the Wall Street Journal and from Al Monitor, Barbara Slavin in Al Monitor, from January of 2015, that when the Houthis took over Sana'a, CENTCOM, that is America's generals, the professional soldiers, said, we don't care. It's fine with us. In fact, we're giving them intelligence, and then they're using our intelligence to target and kill al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. AQAP, the guys that did the Cole attack, the guys that attempted to bomb the plane over Detroit on Christmas 2009, and the guys that Obama had been bombing since, and they did the Cartridge plot, they did the Charlie Hebdo and a couple others in Europe, and that Obama had been bombing since 2009. The military guys said, hey, we found a great new partner in, the Houthis had been up in the north before. America had been helping the government under Saleh fight against them to limited degrees anyway, arming him up for that and everything. But hey, once they came to power, the military was like, well, whatever, as long as they're enemies of al-Qaeda, what the hell do we care? So let's back them. And then 2 months later, Barack Obama stabbed them in the back and turned around and took al-Qaeda's side against them. Now, look, I'm an anti-interventionist. And I think the best way to fight al-Qaeda terrorism in Yemen is to get the hell out of Yemen and stay out. I don't think that I do think that Obama's 2009 drone war against al-Qaeda there, 2009, 10, 11, that drone war proves that even the scalpel approach of using drones to fight only the actual enemies, al-Qaeda, not secular dictators with clean-shaven chins, that's all counterproductive too. That all that ever did, all those drone strikes ever did, was grow al-Qaeda like watering a garden. And the more, because a 500-pound bomb is not a scalpel. A 500-pound bomb kills innocent people, and then their brothers and cousins and fathers join up. Are you surprised? They're human men. Look at how we react when somebody knocks our towers down and kills 3,000 of us. We'll fight for another 20 years in revenge over that. Well, so guess what? Other people on the other side essentially feel the same way when we bring our violence to them, especially when they're people who happen to what? Be nearby some Al-Qaeda guys that they've never met before or something like that. And they and their families have to die too. And we can see the actual results of it. Kyle, it's right there. Al-Qaeda was getting bigger and bigger and bigger the whole time we were fighting them. If anybody had the chance to actually fight them and defeat them, it would have been the Houthis, who were actually from there and actually had a serious vested interest in eradicating their violence. And instead, Barack Obama stabbed the Houthis in the back and took Al-Qaeda's side. And so there you have it. And you know what? I want to be clear so people who don't know me don't misunderstand me. Barack Obama's treason for Al-Qaeda in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen was never inspired by Islamic beliefs on his part or an actual loyalty to the enemy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm accusing him of being Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and George Bush. That is, a backer of terrorists. America uses these terrorists. When they backstab us, like what happened on September 11th, 2001 and September 11th, 2012 in the Benghazi attack in Libya, those are the aberrations. That's when, oops, yeah, sometimes when we play with fire, we get our fingertips burned. But otherwise, this is what we do. We use the Saudis, shock troops, you know, their loyal Arab Afghan mujahideen from the 1980s, and we use them and use them and use them. That's who did, you know, that's another interview I did last week was with Alan Cooperman from the University of Texas, who has this meticulous study about how the Libya war was led by Al-Qaeda from the very, very, very beginning, and that the USA absolutely would have, could have, should have known, and we don't know what they know yet because it's all classified, but they absolutely would have, could have, should have had access to all of the same information that he's compiled that showed that, you know, a bunch of marching students in the street in Benghazi is one thing. A bunch of hardcore Iraq War II veteran LIFG jihadists, dudes out in the countryside getting ready is something else entirely. And anyway, so I'm not saying that Barack Obama is a secret Muslim. I'm not saying he's from Kenya, that, you know, this nonsense that actually Trump made his political stake on that ridiculous, bogus claim, which just goes to show where the American right is right now. That can be the basis of his political support is the false accusation that Obama is actually some secret Kenyan Muslim sent here to usurp McCain's rightful throne or whatever garbage. But no, instead, Barack Obama agreed with John McCain. Yes, we must back Al-Qaeda, right? It was John McCain who wanted to back Al-Qaeda in Libya. It was John McCain who insisted that Obama do more to back Al-Qaeda in Syria, to back Al-Qaeda against the Houthis in Yemen as well. You know, so it's definitely not about that. Obama was just picking up where George Bush had left off. And so, you know, it might sound like kooky stuff, but it's absolutely not. It's simply American national security policy. This is, you know, the enemy in the region is the Shiite crescent, the Iranian axis of alliance over there. So that's the Houthis in Yemen, the Iraqis in Baghdad now because of America kicking the Sunnis out and putting the Shia in power there. And then that's their friends in Damascus in the Ba'athist government there, which is the Alawites and the Shiites are dominant inside that government there and are allied with Iran, as well as Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. These are the adversaries of America. This is the axis of independence from American dominance in the region. And so America is on the side of Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda hates the Shiites more too. And so from the point of view of the U.S. government, who cares who hit the Pentagon? Who cares who knocked the towers down? If they want to fight Iran, fine. And you know what? As long as I'm going on like this, because a lot of this has, you know, like in Syria, that example has kind of petered out over the last few years. And some people may be a little bit new at this and aren't familiar, but I actually kept a little folder here just because I like it so much. It's CFR 4AQ. And these are articles that ran in Foreign Affairs, the Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. Never mind like the hardcore neocons. This is, you know, centrist, Obama-ite, Hillary-ite policy from the last administration. This one is from October 24th, 2017. The moderate face of Al-Qaeda, how the group has rebranded itself. The good and bad of Arar al-Sham. an al-Qaeda-linked group worth befriending. This is by Michael Duran, William McCants, and Clint Watts. Clint Watts, who accuses everyone else of treason and everyone else of being a Russian robot, even though sometimes he admits that his whole dashboard thing is a big hoax, whatever. Anyway, here is Clint Watts, guilty of falsely accusing you of treason, here proposing treason in the pages of Foreign Affairs. And the picture at the top is all a bunch of, Al-Qaeda dudes, all in black with their black ski masks and their AK-47s. Arar al-Sham, which is indistinguishable from Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, in the Syrian war from 2011 through now, really still. Here's another one from March 9th, 2015. Again, in Foreign Affairs. Accepting Al-Qaeda, the enemy of the United States enemy. And it has, for good measure, Kyle, it has a picture of bin Laden and Zawahiri with an AK-47 sitting in their Lion's Den camp in Afghanistan from the old days. Just so that we're clear what they mean when they say Al-Qaeda, they know good and well that, yeah, the butchers of American civilians. Who cares about them? Reads Foreign Affairs magazine published by the Pratt House in New York City. I mean, go figure. And then there's, this is later, was Petraeus saying we should outright ally with al-Nusra to limit the Islamic State. But only because, as you can tell there, right, they're not different in kind. They're just different in their goals. The Islamic State wanted to take Western Iraq away from the Shiites that Petraeus gave it to. So he doesn't want that. He wants them to fight Assad. And if they're not going to fight Assad, then he wants to use Al-Qaeda to fight them. Because the real purpose of backing terrorists in Syria is to get rid of Assad, not to go screwing things up in Iraq, even though they're the ones who screwed everything up in Iraq. Of course, we see even this week that, and we've been keeping a close eye on this, weren't sure exactly what was going on here, but it's been in the Jerusalem Post here for a few days in a row now, that all these explosions at Iraqi military bases, this is the Israelis have been doing airstrikes against Shiite militias in Iraq. The natural victors of Iraq War II, which America fought largely on behalf of the Netanyahu faction of the Likud party in Israel, the neocons' foremost motives. You can read the clean break policy and all of that about that. So it was America's policy on behalf not just of Israel, and not just of the Likud, but of Netanyahu's faction of Likud over Sharon's, who was more obsessed with Iran back in 2003. And of course, then, as we've talked about, the Americans resented the fact that they had fought the war for the Shiite side so badly that they turned around with the redirection beginning in 2006 and started back in the Al-Qaeda side again. But then when Obama, spent $1 billion a year working with Israel, Turkey, Saudi, Qatar, UAE to back these terrorists in the Syria war, it backfired in the form of this giant Islamic State that, as I was just saying, seized Western Iraq, which was not supposed to be part of the plan. And then, so what happened? And actually, you know what? Maybe it was. Maybe they didn't care, because that would then put all this pressure again on the Baghdad government to make them choose us instead of Iran. Who do you love more? We have all the money and all the weapons that you need. What do the Iranians have for you? And when the reality is that they're co-religionists and they have, 3,000 or 10,000 year history going back together there. I mean, Shiism isn't that old, but the Arabs and the Persians, they've been there all along now. They have a history, and they're much more dependent on Iran for a lot of reasons than the Americans. But anyway, whether they wanted the ISIS war to blow back all the way into Iraq or not, eventually they ended up, if it was supposed to be a contest with Iran, they lost it again. Because what happened in Iraq War III? They had to ally not just with the Iraqi army that Petraeus had built out of the Shiite militias, but with all the extra Shiite militias too. Badr Brigade that was still outside the Iraqi army, plus Saib al-Haq and Khatib al-Hezbollah, and all of these different Shiite militia groups had to essentially join up under American air power to destroy the Islamic State. So America fought Iraq War II and Iraq War III for the Shiite side. all the while trying to spite Iran. And then now that they've done so, Netanyahu, oh, and by the way, yeah, as I mentioned, Israel was one of the allies in that whole effort in Syria that blew up into the Islamic State in Iraq, which then required, quote unquote, Iraq War III to destroy it again. So Iraq War II and Iraq War III, Iraq War II was fought really on Israel's behalf. Iraq War III was fought to correct the backdraft, blowback consequences of supporting Israel's side in Syria to check the results of Iraq War II. And then in both cases ended up being in support of Iran, now leading to Netanyahu bombing, supposedly and believably to me, I guess, Iranian-backed Shiite militias in Iraq. And see if anybody on TV is going to show you that chronology here. Wait, why is Israel bombing the people we put in power in Iraq War II and backed in Iraq War III? No, that's because the Americans did what they did because that's what Israel wanted. And what Israel wanted is usually stupid and crazy and horrible and contrary to America's interests.
Well, to roll back to Yemen, just real quick, one last question, Scott, is I noticed a story that the Houthis, for the first time in 4.5 years, by the way, 4.5 years of being accused all the time of being an Iranian proxy, I guess sent some representatives to meet with the Ayatollah. And the Ayatollah said something that Reuters translated to, I support the Houthi movement. And I guess just with everything, you just said and what we've been talking about, why should Americans care even if Iran does support the Houthis? Because it sure seems to me like if, they're the anti-terrorist, anti-AQAP force in all of this. And so supporting the Houthis would just seem to be opposing the terrorists.
Yeah. Well, so there you go again, conflating the American people's interests with the interests of our government. But that's the big mistake, right? Our government doesn't see it that way. They hate the Shia more and would rather ally with Al-Qaeda. So, the two major points to make there is, first of all, that look at the late date here. We're having this conversation in August 2019, which means, as you said, after 5.5 years of war, 4.5 years of war, sorry. After 4.5 years of war, the Ayatollah is now saying, I recognize the Houthis as the official government of the state of Yemen. Hell, they've been the government of at least 2/3 of the country for 4.5 years. Only now does the Ayatollah say, yeah, that's right. You're my little brother. You're part of my group. You're in my little crescent the Americans are so upset about. Again, just like in Iraq War II, to paraphrase King Abdullah then, you just handed Yemen to Iran on a golden platter. You did it. They didn't do it. The Iranians didn't invade Yemen. The Iranians did not send a bunch of missiles and guns and money to the Houthis in order that they would storm the capital city and create this junta. It's just not true. All the Iranians have done is help back them. And as we said, they've been under total blockade. Nasser Arbi has said repeatedly, I don't deny that the Iranians may have been helping the Houthis, but the only way that they can is by way of PayPal and stuff. Not literally, but electronic transfers of money, because then that doesn't take the actual presence of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps officers who cannot get to Yemen. It is under a blockade. Our Star Destroyers are in orbit over it now. They can't get there. So their support has been limited to essentially money and rhetoric. And yet the Americans have handed them credit for every one of the Houthis' victories this whole time. It's the fake excuse for the war in the first place. So then they have no choice but to say, see, every time the Houthis do something, it's a victory for Iran. That's why we have to keep doing this. But the more we stay at war, the more victories the Houthis rack up, and the more PR wins the Iranians rack up. So now here, the Houthis have never been Hezbollah. They have never been the 51st state of Iran the way Hezbollah is in southern Lebanon. But they are beginning now to become more like that. I guess we'll see how far it goes. I don't mean to presume that they will become what the Americans and Saudis have accused them of this whole time, and the Israelis. But if it is to be that way, it's only because we've made it that way. And again, now the Israelis are saying, well, hell, if the UAE isn't in, we'll go ahead and we'll start bombing the Houthis then. And I don't know if that's really true or not, but that's what Netanyahu threatened.
Wow,
and they've taken this whole new stand of escalation in Iraq against Iranian assets in Iraq, just as they've been doing in Syria this whole time. It's a hell of a thing, man. You know, I'm trying to figure out in my book, I'm thinking ahead to, and this was part of the problem when I did that presentation for the Thaddeus Russell thing, was where do I put the Iran chapter exactly? Because this is the one country that it's not one of our wars, but it's at the center of so much of what is going on here. You know, I guess it'll have to go between, I don't know, Iraq War II and Libya maybe, or no, maybe Somalia is after Iraq War II. Maybe Iran goes after Libya before Syria. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was going to actually move us to Afghanistan now. I just want to, ask if you had any sense of where these peace talks are going. I guess Trump had a big meeting with Pence, Pompeo, Bolton, and Khalilzad maybe a weekend or two ago. And I don't know, I'm getting pretty concerned that a deal isn't going to be done here, because it seems like the American position isn't, that our troops are going to leave on the timeline.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, well, first of all, just to back up here, it's quite apparent to me that, there will be a Bob Woodward book written about this at some point, I guess. But it sure seems as though Khalilzad works directly for the president, not for the Secretary of State in any meaningful way. He has the word of the president himself to back him on this, and that he must have been told that he is absolutely authorized to tell the Taliban that, yes, I am, allowed to settle for essentially nothing but a promise that you guys will keep Al-Qaeda out. And that is remarkable. I mean, if you remember in my book, I recommended just go, because I don't think that the Americans could ever sign a deal and shake hands on a deal that ultimately is a total capitulation of America to Taliban goals, that they'll just lose too much face and that they would rather stay forever than sign a withdrawal agreement. And so maybe I was wrong about that. And maybe it really is possible for the Americans to go ahead and go. Now, it's true that the military really wants to stay. They want that Bagram Air Base forever, and they'll come up with any excuse for keeping it. And, the generals, the heads of CENTCOM, the previous and current heads of CENTCOM, and the previous and current head general in the Afghan war have all been insubordinate in denouncing Trump's plans and saying that, no, we absolutely can't leave now. We can't agree to that. And I don't know what you're talking about. And we haven't made any plans along those lines and all this kind of thing, and trying to undermine it. If you're referring to Trump saying this week that, we'll always still be there, we'll have something there, this, that, maybe that is a loophole that they've worked out with the Taliban about, well, we get to keep some CIA forces there, because the Taliban have said troops, troops, troops. They have not said, I don't think, that they have said, hey, and that includes CIA too, to the nth degree, that everybody has to go. So maybe that's a little bit of a loophole there. But I essentially think they already have a deal, and that they're essentially kicking the can around in a circle rather than down the road. They're just waiting essentially for the right timing for Trump's, political fortunes to announce the thing. So I think we may have to wait, and they may have to pretend that they don't quite have a deal yet for a little while longer. But when I saw Trump saying, well, we might leave some people, nah, he's just, essentially, creating the circumstances of saying there's still something to be ironed out, to leave it something a little bit less than completely obvious that the deal is essentially already made and everybody already knows it, which everybody already does. And it's funny, because I get the Afghanistan Google News alert every day. And, there are some people saying, oh, no, we can't go now and this kind of thing. But more and more you see people saying it's time to just go, and we're not afraid of no safe havens and all of this kind of stuff. And so there was a headline this morning: the American people will support Donald Trump if he gets out of Afghanistan. And I think that's right. I think he can count on that. I think he'd be crazy for his own selfish political fortunes he would be crazy to not figure out how to sign some kind of deal with Kim, some kind of troop pullout from Afghanistan. Complete pullout from Afghanistan, pull the troops out of Syria and I'd say Western Iraq too, but at least get them out of Syria and call off the war in Yemen. He could do all these things and run as Trump the Great and say, look, all these things that have been going on, these were all somebody else's fault. Big dummy Bush and big weakling Obama, they're the ones who ruined everything. And all I did was show up. I gave it a good try to clean up their messes. I gave the military my first term to figure out how to tie up the loose ends. And that's over now. And so that's it. We're getting out, man. That's it. Vote Trump. I ended 5 wars. How do you like me now? And I think he would win in a landslide. I don't think he's going to do that. No, I meant to. I put off and then forgot. One more in there is he needs to figure out how to drop the sanctions with Iran and pretend that what they've done is good enough, which it is, but pretend that somehow he's changed his mind or they've done something different that has now impressed him or something, and drop all this tension with Iran. And as long as I'm at it, he needs to pull all the weapons and troops that he's added to the Baltics and Ukraine out to, and Poland. There's a lot, but you know what? It is true that all of these wars are somebody else's fault in the first place, and that he has, politically speaking, for his own selfish gain, he has nothing to lose and everything to gain by ending them.
Right. Well, hell of a wish list there. And I guess, like you said, the sad thing is all of it could somewhat easily happen. I guess one of the reasons I've become a little bit more pessimistic in the past couple of weeks about any kind of Afghan peace is just seeing the news coverage now of Afghanistan. First of all, it seems like local news is covering it again. And anytime there's any kind of attack, whether it's the Taliban attacking a Afghan troop outpost, American soldiers dying in Afghanistan, which is, unbelievably still happening, even though we're deep in these peace talks now, our soldiers are dying there.
Yeah, 2 more Green Berets the day before yesterday.
Right. Or even if it's the Islamic State, who are the enemies of the Taliban, carrying out attacks in Afghanistan, it's all framed in the context of, well, Trump's negotiating peace while this is going on. And so it seems that if the timeline for the troop withdrawal is any kind of, length of time, then the worst state's just going to drip it in, just say we can't leave now because there's this last attack or this next attack. And so I want to ask if you thought there was any hope that if the Americans do agree to, leave, that maybe the Taliban will agree to at least not blow themselves up in public. And if there's enough cohesion, among the Taliban ranks to kind of all agree to the same peace deal, or are you concerned that maybe there's going to be a Taliban faction that, kind of doesn't want the peace deal and plans to do something else?
Well, yeah, because there's different peace deals here. One is the American withdrawal agreement, which is essentially, we'll stop attacking you when you are no longer here to attack. That's what America's agreeing to there. The other peace deal would be a ceasefire with the Afghan government. And as you say, there's a question of cohesiveness. I think probably the Taliban can get their act together in the face of their victory. There may be some faction fights to be had, but their current leader, Haqqanzadeh, was Mullah Omar's mentor, back, in the 80s or 90s or whatever. And so he apparently has brought a lot of credibility and stability to the Taliban movement and factions, and has had a much, more intelligent doctrine than his predecessor, who actually was seen to really just favor some tribes over others and this and that, and was more just selfish and corrupt. This guy has really adopted the counterinsurgency strategy. I forget if we talked about this before, but there is a woman named Ashley Jackson who I never could arrange to get her on the show, unfortunately. But she had traveled all through Taliban country, I think 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. It was about a year ago she came out with this giant study. And it was about how they don't attack in Pashtunistan anyway. They don't attack police stations. They don't attack schools. They don't attack any of the local bureaucracy buildings anymore. They just take them over. And a lot of times they do it without force at all. They run for election and they make sure that their guy wins. They make sure that the school is being taught by a Taliban-approved teacher. The mayor is a Taliban-approved mayor. And they're not even necessarily Taliban themselves, but they know who the real boss is. It ain't Kabul. It's the Taliban. And so they're fighting the people's war like Mao Zedong and David Petraeus, only instead of being, the completely ridiculous, incompetent boob Petraeus, they know what they're doing. And they are ruthless killers. I mean, you talk about blowing themselves up in public. I mean, they are, they are terrorists. They have become, maybe they already kind of were in a way. They were butchers before, but they absolutely have adopted Al-Qaeda type terrorist tactics over, really since that they imported from Iraq War II, that they got from Al-Qaeda and Iraq fighters in Iraq War II and then brought to Afghanistan in time for Obama's surge then. And this is, again, part of why I thought there can be no deal. America should just leave and then never look back, because what's going to happen is, what has happened is America's lost. The Taliban controls 60% of the country, and there are more optimistic takes, but I don't know why to err on the side of optimism. I mean, I think that when America goes, there's probably going to be a civil war until the Taliban win it, or at least as far as they're concerned, that's what they're going to try to do. And that there will be a hell of a lot of fighting. And that if TV wants to say, look, something bad happened in Afghanistan and it's all Donald Trump's fault, they will be able to do that. And that's why he has to be able to master the talking point of, no, that's Barack Obama and George W. Bush's fault. They built a government that cannot stand. And I'm supposed to continue sending American infantry over there to defend it for how long? Forever? No, I won't do that. Send George Bush and Barack Obama over there to hold that government up. Let's see how brave they are out there. This is crazy. The war's already lost. But so the deal is, of course, and he should also say that, if we still had troops there, then you would say, oh, all the violence is just despite our best efforts. But if we leave, then all the violence is my fault for leaving. I mean, it's just not true. There's been plenty of violence this whole time. He really should have done this his first year. He should have just come in and said, look, man, I've had my Afghanistan briefings and I'm just not going to do this. I'm not going to ask one more of you moms or dads out there to give your sons to this thing. There's no way. And he's a businessman. You talk like a businessman. This is the sunk cost fallacy, man. This thing is bankrupt. We're putting it in court and getting the hell out. That's it. Cashing in our chips and quitting and moving on to the next thing. And make a clean break from it, to coin a phrase there. And he hasn't done that. He surged for 2 years now. And you know what? All the Russiagate stuff all got worn out. So they're looking for new things to hang him with. And this one, it works, man. Did you see Marianne Williamson, the self-help guru Democratic candidate, tweeted the other day that it would be so irresponsible for Donald Trump to leave Afghanistan until he secured the rights of women there. Well, I'm sorry, but you're talking about the most back-asswards culture in the world when it comes to the rights of women. And that's not the Taliban's fault. In fact, as I show in my book, quoting Anand Gopal's work there, oftentimes the Taliban could be seen as very progressive compared to the Pashtunwali tribal code that goes back for like 3,000 years or 4,000 years or something. And so the Taliban come in and say, no, that woman does have the right to inherit property and then sell it. What? According to the Pashtunwali code, you've got to be kidding me. But according to the Taliban, yeah, it says it right here in the Quran. And so the Quran is, left-wing progressivism compared to the Pashtunwali code. But you're just not supposed to understand that or care about that. You're just supposed to say, listen, the mandate of the people of Alabama is to send their sons to turn deepest, darkest Central Asia into Connecticut. And we're not going to stop until that's carried out. And how dare you abandon the women of Afghanistan as though they belong to us.
Right.
So
that's the progressive
bombing them
position.
to death is as long as we're the ones doing it, is for their own good. And any of them that die in that, well, that's just collateral damage. But when the Taliban kill them, well, that's just your fault for stopping killing them while trying to kill the Taliban.
Right. It's great that she does it as, being a progressive feminist or, reformed. This is, we bring, feminism through bombs. Like, how stupid is that?
Yeah.
Man,
well, and
this lady.
Listen, part of this too is it's because of the TV media. I mean, I don't know, man, if it was any better in the 90s at all, but I know that certainly, I don't guess that it really was. But I do know that during Iraq War II and during the Afghan War, for that matter, talking about Israel, Palestine, or any of these things, they have every opportunity to say, all right, look, the basic facts are these, okay? Here's a map, and here's who's who, and here's whose side we're on, and here's why the other side has such a vested interest in resisting, okay? Here's the shirts, here's the skins, here's whose ball it is, here's the score. They won't ever respect you enough to even tell you what the hell is going on with any of these things at all. So try telling Marianne Williamson that, listen, man, you're just supporting a Tajik dictatorship over the Pashtuns. And she'd be like, huh? She doesn't know anything. Who told her to know anything? Nobody. And at what point did she think, I better shut up until I learn a little something about what the hell I'm talking about? Never. And yes, it's the Hazaras and the Uzbeks with the Tajiks too, but the Tajiks make up most of the army. Anyway, the thing is, she doesn't know about that. As far as she's concerned, that's none of her business. She doesn't care about that. She doesn't need to know about that. All she needs to know is American GIs are heroes and they need to make things right. I mean, which is really, George W. Bush level thinking. I don't know about the making things right part, but at least the part where the U.S. Army can and should do anything and everything that anyone can think of for them to do. And it'll work. Cholera outbreak, deploy the troops, whatever it is. Send an aircraft carrier and put them in orbit around the rogue country until they obey. Bombard them if you have to. And that is what absolutely passes for the thinking of liberals in America. I mean, you could argue that there's nothing alien about it. It's essentially the idea is that the government ought to have as much power as it needs to make society exactly how it should be. And who says that ideology stops at the shore's edge? And this is a great right-wing argument against all this interventionism, is that what's really wrong with the neocons isn't that they abandoned the left and became right-wingers. It's that they never really abandoned the left when they became right-wingers. They brought their ideology of world revolution and of, collectivist national identity with them. And so this is how to make America great, is to face down the USSR. And after that, to go and beat down Saddam Hussein. And after that, who else you got? Slobodan Milosevic? Let's do it. Muammar Gaddafi? Well, we'll make friends with him now. We'll bomb him later. But, essentially that's their thing is, social engineering, remaking the world the way that they think it should be with no conservative recognition of the scarcity of the American people's resources. And for that matter, our complete lack of consent, for this doctrine. Nobody ever asked the American people if they wanted to sign up to be the world empire forever, to be responsible for the security of every other state forever. But it's just presumed that we're just going to bear that burden as long as these guys want us to. There's something for a conservative who's not a partisan, who doesn't care about the Republican Party or doesn't care about his previous love affair with George W. Bush's persona, but is just a conservative who can think and read. They might say that, what? Hey, you really can't have a republic and an empire. It is one or the other. You can't have a balanced budget and a permanent war. You can't have a state of normalcy and a state of emergency in perpetuity, can you? It's the radicals who don't care about that. It's the radicals who, people like the Wolfowitzes and the Pearls of the world who they want a state of emergency for exactly that reason, to prevent a feeling of normalcy, to prevent, people from establishing their own spontaneous order, to make sure to always have a crisis to exploit. And so it should be obvious enough to everybody by now. That's the thing that bothers me the most, right? Is when people act like they haven't been living in the same 21st century as you and me this whole time. Hey, did you hear there's a pretty lousy government down in Venezuela? What are we going to do about it? Ask a bunch of libertarians, self-identified, as though the problem in the world is leftist economics and politics in Venezuela, not the American empire with the $4 trillion budget looking for something to do constantly, and happens to be the government that they're responsible for. And they want to sit there and bolster it and give it things to do in the name of bad economics somewhere. Same thing with the liberals in Obama years. Obama wants to use George W. Bush's military to go to Libya, and you're going to support that. And then what happens after the regime change? Who's going to build a new army there? Who's going to create a new state there? What's going to happen after that? You don't even care just because it's your guy? Just because, it's not even that Gaddafi. Gaddafi's kind of a leftist. It's not even that Gaddafi was an enemy that liberals cared about at all. They didn't care about Gaddafi. They just liked Obama. And so, what the hell? Obama says he's going to lead from behind and make everything better over there. Didn't you hear?
All right, Scott. Well, I guess we're over an hour, so we should be wrapping up here. I was going to ask you about Ahmed Hayek getting out of jail, but you and Trevor Harrison did a great job on your show covering that. So I'll just link to that episode on the show notes page for those of people who want to listen to that. I'll also mention that the Libertarian Institute is going to be releasing a couple books coming up. And Scott, if you want to take just a minute or two and let people know what to be on the lookout for to buy in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, man. I hope it'll be as soon as this week. Very soon I will be releasing The Great Ron Paul, the Scott Horton Show interviews 2004 through 2019. And I am absolutely certain that people are going to love that. I sure do. It's almost ready. Just waiting on the cover art, and that's about it. Got a little bit more, a few more days worth of work to do. Should come out sometime next week. And then very soon after that, because I'm in too much of a hurry, and I don't have much of a eye and ear for marketing and timing and stuff like that. I'm just going to go ahead as soon as I can and finish and put out a collection of Sheldon Richman's essays, which will be titled Why Palestine Matters. And it's Sheldon Richman's great libertarian take on all issues related to the controversy of Israel and Palestine there. And it's essays going back for 30 years too, so you can see all of this great stuff explaining that, how things were, playing out over the time as well. So that's really great. And then I'll be getting back to work on my book. But so people can look at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org, where we're happy to host your show as well. And I think very soon, I don't know if it's probably not there yet, but soon we'll have Libertarian Institute /books, where people can find my book, Fool's Errand, Will Grigg's great book, No Quarter, the Ron Paul book, The Great Ron Paul, and then very soon after that, Sheldon Richman's Why Palestine Matters, and then someday, hopefully in the next few months or so, my next book, which is yet to be titled, something about ending the war on terrorism.
All right. Awesome. Look forward to it. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Kyle.